It is time for that little bit of Wednesday Q&A that I love to deliver to all the Sovereign Tech patrons. And maybe we're going to have some other stuff out this week, but, well, you know, I'm not alone this week, so.
Oh, you're never alone when it comes to me, because I stick by your side.
Oh, I love you. That
I
is
love
so
you
wonderful.
too.
Of course, being joined here by the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy. And we're going to shake things up just a little bit on this one. And there's a couple questions we're going to get into. One's a tech question, one's a science question. Then actually, Stephanie, and I didn't even tell you this, I usually do an album of the week for the Q&As.
Oh.
And so I'm going to let you pick one. I'll pick one too. And, you know, music album. It could be anything. Doesn't have to be new. Could be old. Just, hell, it could be your favorite album. You don't have to do it right now.
Since I'm a cultural Marxist, I'm going to go with anything from Richard Marx.
That's not a bad pick at all. I am a huge fan of Richard Marx. Beautiful Goodbye all the way back. But anyway, so we'll get into that later, and maybe we'll have time for another question or so. But why don't we just open this right up? And because we're kind of on a tight schedule here, and I'm wearing practically nothing. So
I'm wearing, I'm a little loose and flowing too with my attire this evening.
I need to get you a Klingon bathrobe, because that's all I'm wearing right now.
Do.
I think you would look.
I definitely need a Klingon bathrobe. I've got my hair is pretty Klingon looking, I guess.
Yeah.
I just need some forehead ridges and I'm good to go. And the bathrobe,
That's true.
Of course.
That's true. So, all right. Well, we'll get into the first question here, which is largely a tech one. Stephanie, if you have any thoughts, of course, you're welcome to share them on it. And this one won't take too long. But the second question, your expertise as an actual biochemist, a PhD, is going to come in handy. So anyway,
I forget. You told me what these questions were, but I forget. So let's do it.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'll be surprised. It'll be new to me.
Yeah. So the first question is question for a Q&A, if you don't mind. If one has been going without a VPN for, of course, it's virtual private network for so long, but they really should be using one, maybe due to the quote unquote legality of some of their activities, nothing bad. Is it pointless to get one at this point, or is it better late than never?
Oh, I think I know what you're going to say.
What do you think I'm going to say?
Better late than never.
Yes.
You always do your best. It's don't fall into futility.
Yeah. Definitely. So, okay. Now this question came up obviously because of recent, enactments by the Trump administration. Shall we say? And so now everybody's really concerned because their web history isn't just being held or tracked for 5 years, by the ISPs. But now it's actually being, now could be sold off and, could be given to advertisers and all this. Yeah. It's really ugly business. So yeah, a lot of people, I mean, the amount of questions I got for people asking me, okay, hey, what VPN should I use? What should I do for this? Blah, 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 has been through the roof, frankly. And of course, this past week on Sovereign Tech, we did a whole segment talking about that story. What's happening on Capitol Hill, and then also what VPNs to use and how to use them, all the best practices, there too. So I'm not going to get into those, right now, but just to answer the simple question, I mean, I will say again that yes, my number one VPN to go with is private internet access. That's privateinternetaccess.com. They're just the best, buy with Bitcoin, do the whole thing. But definitely start using a VPN now, because understand that like your ISPs, there is a cutoff point, and the new, it isn't new legislation. It's more of a turnover, but the new, I'll just put it that way. The new legislation, what everybody's concerned about, didn't change how long the ISPs were allowed to hold on to your data. So point being is that 3-4 years from now, or 5 years from now, which is the original amount of time that an ISP can actually hold this data. And not all of them, I need to be clear on this. Not all of these ISPs are going to engage in this. Like I imagine there's some ISPs, a lot of your little guys, like this is just a great opportunity for them to have a market differentiator to where they can say, we're not like Comcast, we're not like Time Warner, whoever, and we're not going to sell off your data. Like it makes a great marketing tactic, really. So guys like Sonic.net and others, I'm sure they're not going to engage in this. Also, that 5-year rule of how long they can hold your information is, I mean, it's not a requirement that they hold it for 5 years. It's that they can hold it for up to 5 years.
Oh, so they might not have room to hold it. And
Yeah.
so they might actually have gotten rid of it. So, yeah, that's interesting. So if the clock starts now, if you start using a VPN for everything you do online now, maybe they only hold your records for 1 year, and after a year, you'll have nothing on you.
Sure, or less. I mean, whichever. And so, yeah, start now. Always start best practices now, even if you've screwed up everything before, or not screwed up, but you know what I mean.
Even if you've been a complete fucking failure up to this point, there's still time to redeem yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it reminds me of the old Jewish proverb. I don't know if it's actually a Jewish proverb, but
Wow,
it's a proverb. The best time to plant a tree is yesterday. But if you haven't done that, today is the next best time. I'm paraphrasing. That's not the exact proverb.
No.
The best time to plant a tree is yesterday, but if you haven't, then the next best time is today.
Right. Well, it's like the question, you know, saving money, right? Like,
oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, okay, so you never saved money. Well, today's a good day to start. And this is true with all the best practices online. You know, if you haven't used a VPN before, now's the time. And if anything, again, like I think for a lot of people, they were thinking that, okay, and I've definitely gone down this path where I'm saying that I've empathized going down this path. Not that I've gone down this path. I use a VPN all the time, but like they're thinking, well, okay, look, we're screwed. The NSA can see everything. China can break VPNs, you know, and all this different shit, right? And so they're like, well, so I'm not going to bother using a VPN. Yeah, but the reason now is very different. The reason now is your target is something that I think you can do something about, or what you're trying to defend from is something you can do something about. That being the ISPs
the companies,
themselves.
Yeah, the ISPs and the companies they're selling your data to, right?
Right. Yeah. So you can, you can actually do something about this. So
could they at least give you a discount on your internet service if they're going to make money off of your internet habits?
Oh,
Jeez.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's kind of rude.
Yeah, right.
At least offer something.
Yeah, so start those best practices now. Make that happen. That no time to no need to think get into like a sunk cost or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, no, it's a great question to ask. I mean, you can. It's always good to check in and see. Well, geez, am I screwed? Like, is there any point to me even trying? And again, the point is that really the target, the thing you're trying to, what you are trying to thwart now is not the NSA. It's not the FBI, it's not all of them. You're trying to thwart, ISPs. And I mean, and even then it's still, using a VPN still makes it expensive for, all those alphabet soup organizations at the same time. So anyway, do you have any other thoughts on that, Stephanie? Or are you ready to move on?
No, let's move on.
All right, let's do the next bit of business here. So this is the one where, Stephanie, I'm really going to need your expertise.
All right.
I mean,
I can talk up in my armor. I'm ready.
I can talk about it, but you actually have, shall we say, credentials. You can talk shit about this.
I got cred.
Yeah. So the question is, I mean, basically, it's from a tweet. I hope you are able to incorporate this question in the Patreon questions, but do you see any flaws in the peer review process?
Let me count the ways, right? Yes, I see lots of flaws in the peer review process.
Tell me more.
Okay, so I forgot.
Well, maybe describe exactly the peer review process.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Okay, so peer review refers to a process by which scientific findings are vetted and then published. And what it is basically scientists work usually in academic settings, in labs at colleges and universities. And usually they get their funding from the government, sometimes from some private grants, but the majority of the funding usually comes from the government.
Right.
And when they have something that they want to publish, a scientific discovery that they've made, they build a case for it by doing experiments and compiling the results of those experiments into usually figures, graphs, and charts, and then writing it up as an academic paper. But before that paper can get published, they can't just hit publish like a blog post and have it go out onto the internet. I mean, they could, but it wouldn't be peer reviewed. Right. So if they wanted to be peer reviewed, they send it to a scientific journal, and how good they think the scientific discovery is, or how new or how interesting or how relevant or how important it is determines how good of a journal they send it to. And the journals are ranked in terms of, there's sort of like a pecking order. Like if you have a really important medical discovery, let's just say, you might send it to the New England Journal of Medicine,
right,
or the
very,
JAMA.
very popular, like all kinds
That's
of
like
people
the top
read that.
medical journal.
Yeah.
Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, is probably like number 2.
Sure.
British medical journals down a little bit further, BMJ, but that's still good and respectable. If you have a really important finding in cell biology, you might send it to Cell, which is like one of the top scientific journals. Cell, Nature, and Science are the top 3. They kind of float around as far as the order, but they're all up there, very prestigious.
PLOS One.
PLOS One is interesting because PLOS One is not peer reviewed in the same way that Nature, Science, and Cell are.
Okay.
So I'm just talking about the traditional peer review process for now, and then we'll talk about the exceptions to that rule.
Okay.
So if you want to publish your paper, you write it up as an academic paper. You build as strong as a case as you can with your evidence that you've gathered based on your own original research, and then you write it up and send it to a journal. The editor of that journal, or one of the deputy editors, who is an expert in that field, will send it to other scientists in that field. Those are supposed to be your peers, and they are supposed to review your work.
Okay.
And so then what usually happens is they get at least 2 reviewers, and the reviewers are supposed to say one of 2 things. Either they can reject the paper, so they can just say, nope, rejected, there's too many flaws, it's not suitable for publication here. And if both reviewers reject it, then they just get a rejection letter. And they usually the original team will submit it to a different journal.
Right.
And then keep kind of going down the line based on how good the journal is, and try to get it in the best journal they can get it accepted at. Okay. So if the paper is rejected, that's what happens. They move on to a different journal. If one of the reviewers says, this is good, but there's some problems with it, they will come back to the editor and they will say, we like this paper, or we like some things about this paper, but we want the team to do some additional experiments, or we want them to address these criticisms or these questions that we have. And then they'll usually write up a formal thing that says that is a detailed description of what their problems with the paper are that they want addressed before they would accept it. And then the editor of the journal passes that back to the team of scientists that did the work. And it could be, you made a typo here. Usually it's not a typo. Usually it's something very significant like, we want you to do another experiment to prove this and this and this. Or we want you to find a mechanism. Yeah, okay, we see you've discovered this finding, but explain how it happens, not just that it happens, right? So usually they come back with additional experiments. Those additional experiments can take years sometimes.
Okay.
So actually, I'll wait to say what the problems with the process are until after we describe the whole process.
Yes.
But anyway, so the reviewers can request changes, and then sometimes the original team will decide to address the changes that the reviewers requested, and do the additional experiments that they asked for, or make the changes to their paper, or put in additional citations or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then they resubmit it with the changes and a cover letter explaining how they addressed all those changes to the editor of the journal. And then the editor sends it back to the reviewers and says, okay, are you satisfied? And then the editor may be involved in that decision too, whether to accept the paper.
Okay.
And then the paper either gets accepted or it might be rejected. And so then they have to kind of start all over. Another choice that the original team of scientists who did the research could make is if they get reviews on a paper from their peers and the reviewers are asking too much, they're asking for additional experiments that take years or something like that, they might just say, well, we're going to move on to a lesser journal and try to publish it there now.
Right.
Because a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush or whatever.
Right.
So they might try to get it published right away without doing all the extra work, but they're not going to get it in as prestigious of a journal. So that's kind of the way the peer review process works. Another thing we should mention is that the reviewers are anonymous. So if you're a scientist who wrote a paper and you send it to a journal, you know who the editor of the journal is that you're corresponding with, but you don't know who the reviewers are. It'll just say like reviewer number 1 and reviewer number 2. Right? And so you don't know who is actually reviewing your work. It could be your competitor. It could be the lab that's doing something very similar to yours, and likely it is because they're supposed to be experts in your field.
Which leads to, we don't have to go down this road yet, but which leads to, in my mind, one of the first things that comes up for me when I think about problems with the peer review process. But keep going.
Yep. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's basically how it works. There have been some journals that have experimented with making changes to the peer review process. For example, they will publish, I think EMBO Journal was the first to do this. This was the European Molecular Biology Association Journal or something like that. And what they did was they experimented with putting the paper on their website with the comments that the reviewers gave, like making it transparent. Normally, you would only see the finished paper after it's been through the review process. You wouldn't see the first draft and what the reviewers said about that said,
Right.
hey, change this before we can publish it. You would only see the finished version. But EMBO Journal decided to show sort of how the sausage was made a little bit. And that was interesting. I mean, I think it's cool. It's good to experiment with that kind of stuff. It brings a little more transparency to the process.
Well, and that can be handy too. Like, so when you're translating texts, like say older texts or even new ones, it doesn't matter. You often have translation notes like left on the side that will, help you understand, or maybe that there's alternative translations that are possible, all kinds of things. So that's a very useful tool when you're dealing, I imagine, with science, in particular, among other things. So sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess some journals have also experimented with I don't know if journals have done this, but I know there have been calls to make it transparent who the reviewers are, at least after the process, right? Because you want to be able to see who made these comments and what they said.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically how peer review works. Also, it's not just academic papers that are peer reviewed, it's grants as well. Grants are peer reviewed. So when you ask the government as a scientist, when you ask the government for a grant, usually the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, you would send it to the NIH, and someone at the NIH who knows the scientists in your field would send it to others of your peers, others who are experts in that field.
Right.
Actually, sometimes they have committees of people, and they pick someone who's kind of close to being an expert from the committee.
Okay.
But yeah, you get anonymous reviews back on those too. So yeah, peer review applies not just to academic papers, but also to grants. Now, I don't know the historical origins of peer review. I mean, it's an entrenched system. Like, this is how things work in academic settings.
Sure.
And yeah, everybody recognizes there might be some problems with it, but it's not going to change anytime soon. This is this was a bulwark of academic research.
Yeah, if I were to guess, where like most things that we consider like a stock part of science, I would guess it started with like the Royal Society of London.
Yeah, I would guess. Yep.
And
it's a guild system.
Sure.
It's getting other people who are supposed to be your intellectual equals and your peers to review your work. And hopefully the idea is that makes it better, right? That when you get feedback on your work before you just put it out there, it actually improves the work.
Right.
And I think it does. I mean, I've had academic published papers that have gone through peer review, and what the reviewers suggested there were good suggestions that did make the work better in the end. So I think you have to treat it like that. It can be annoying when you get back something and they're like, oh yeah, no, we can't publish this unless you do this other experiment that's going to take you a year. It can be really annoying to get that feedback.
Yeah.
But then you just have to sort of decide what you're going to do with it. And in the end, it's all supposed to be making your work better.
Now, you are published. Right.
Yep, I have published scientific papers.
Okay.
I also have reviewed scientific papers. And that's one of the problems. That's one of the problems I was going to suggest. Because when I was a grad student, before I even had my PhD, sometimes my thesis advisor would give me papers that he got asked to peer review and ask me to do a peer review on them.
But then he'd put his stamp on it.
Well, he would. Yeah, I think he would read them too, and he would probably add his own critiques into it as well. He wouldn't just take what I did and not even read the paper,
Oh, okay.
but he would ask me to do it as practice for me, and also to like make it a little bit less work for him, because maybe I would catch things that
Sure.
that would save him some time.
Second pair of eyes. Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, I don't doubt that there are heads of labs out there that just have their grad students doing all the peer review, that don't even look at them.
Right.
Especially if it's for sort of a lesser journal. Like, it's like, okay, no one cares. Everybody's busy. They're just like, yeah, pass it, or yeah, fail it, or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. It might not be because the reviewers are anonymous, and because there's that potential to share it with like sort of the whole lab, you might not know who is actually doing the peer review.
Okay.
And you might not get the greatest review. It's not uncommon for a paper to be entered into peer review and to come back, and reviewer number 1 says, oh yeah, great, accept it, no changes. Reviewer number 2 says, oh, let's change this and add this reference, and it's very different between the two reviewers. Sometimes one reviewer says no, reject, and the other reviewer says accept, and they have to bring in a tiebreaker or involve the editor of the journal. So like 2 different scientists can read the same paper, and they're supposed to be all experts in the same field, and they can have a completely different view of it.
Wildly different conclusions. Yeah.
Okay. Or just how much effort they put into the peer review in the first place, right? Like maybe reviewer number 1 said, oh yeah, it's fine, accept it, because he just didn't care. He didn't have time to read it, right? Or she, or they. So that's one issue with peer review. The other issue, as I mentioned before, is like, your competitors, basically, it could be your competitors that are reviewing your paper.
Yeah.
And so what if your competitor gets a paper to review? They find out in advance of everybody else knowing, because you haven't published it yet. They find out in advance of everybody else that basically your newest and freshest work, and maybe it relates to something they're working on. And maybe it completes a puzzle for them. And so they have special access to this information that you've just discovered before anybody else does. They might say, well, we're working on something very similar in our lab. Why don't you, this paper's good, but why don't you do this experiment that's going to take 5 years to complete? And then in the meantime, they scoop you and they publish it. Your competitor publishes basically the same thing, and then you can't get your work that you actually did first published anywhere because somebody's already published it.
Well, and that hints at like one of the issues that I know has occurred in the past, where literally like one guy didn't like another guy who's trying to publish a paper, and because he was the reviewer, he just totally fucked with the dude that was trying to publish. I won't go into details, but like, I mean, that happens.
Oh, it does happen.
And all because the shit has nothing to do with even with science. Like with yours, okay, it's a competitor. Like you get the incentive, even though it's still shitty that it occurs.
Yeah.
But I mean, this could be for like someone slept with somebody's wife or something, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm going to mess."
What a great way to get revenge, right?
Right. I mean, and with a lot of these journals and a lot of, I mean, this is, I mean, it's not a tightly knit community, and there's certainly
but it's a small community,
right?
Especially when you're talking about certain niches within science. It's
exactly.
a small community, and they know each other. They go to conferences together. These people are in the same industry, and so yeah, it's totally possible that personal vendettas could get mixed in there in the picture. And there's also the situation with grants. Sometimes when a grant goes out for review, it's supposed to be double blinded. Like the applicant of the grant is not shown to the reviewers. When you're reviewing an academic paper, the reviewer can see the authors of the paper and who authored it. But when they're reviewing a grant, sometimes they don't know who's applying for this grant, and so because it's supposed to be extra non-biased, right? But based on what the content is of what they're asking for research money for, who's applying. You can read between the lines because there's only one person that would apply for a grant like this.
Sure.
So that happens as well, even when they try to sort of blind it. There's also situations where, like, I feel like the reviewers in peer review have a lot of power and not a lot of accountability.
Well, they can be gatekeepers.
They're gatekeepers. They are gatekeepers.
Yeah.
And that's the problem because, the idea is for them to make the paper better, but they hold a lot of power over the scientist. And especially when you're talking about grad students, a lot of, not even just grad students, but also like postdoctoral fellows, or even tenured professors, or even assistant professors who haven't gotten tenure yet. This is their livelihood. If you publish a paper there's a saying in science called "publish or perish." Right?
Nah.
If you publish a paper in a prestigious scientific journal, that will catapult your career forward. However, if you do not publish anything, or if you publish in shitty journals, that is like a wet blanket on your career. So there's a lot of pressure to publish in prestigious journals.
Sure.
And so much pressure at times that it leads some scientists to fake data. And now they have algorithms that try to detect when you photoshopped a picture or something like that, or the blah, blah, blah. But back in the early 2000s, when there were lots of findings about stem cells going on and cloning, like there was a famous, the Korean guy who faked his cloning data. And then there was also a couple of papers in like stem cell journals where the data was faked. And you could see in the paper that they just took an image and like literally turned it upside down or something like that. And it was the same image it was labeled as two different things. So, though you can fool an algorithm, I guess, sometimes, right? Yeah. And so the pressure to publish is enormous, and the reviewers hold a lot of power over it. And so there are always the incentives when there's power imbalances like that. There are always incentives for corruption. Right.
Yeah, I mean, and then even with the reviewers themselves, I mean, what personal prejudices could come in with that, where they're like, oh, no,
absolutely,
I'm not letting this happen. Again, that goes back to them being gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, would you say that largely, if you have more to enumerate, that's fine.
Yeah. One more thing.
Yeah.
Before we start.
Go for it.
At the end of an academic paper, you always have to declare where you got funding for the research and if there are any conflicts of interest, right? Like if you hold, for example, if you hold stock or if you have started a company related to the scientific thing that you're researching or something like that. And, those conflicts of interest are there. But the conflict of interest that nobody discloses is that all of this is funded by the government, right? And the government always has its own agendas, even when you're talking about a scientific department like the NIH, right? Mm-hmm. They have political agendas just like any other part of the government, right? And so, but those are like invisible. They're never declared as conflicts of interest. And so even things like what gets funded to do research on is political. And that is a problem because, if scientists could kind of just do research on whatever they wanted, they would probably be more motivated by profit motive instead of like political motives.
Sure.
And so what you would see papers published on would look very different, right? And maybe, I don't know, dare I say, maybe it would create bad incentives like the pharma companies have to make blockbuster drugs, right? To research things that are popular or could lead to like drug discovery or whatever.
Right.
But you could also argue that a profit motive for scientists would lead them to research things that could be more useful to humankind, that could solve problems for humanity.
Right. That would have larger applications and
rather than just kind of interesting intellectual puzzles.
Right.
Which are good and can lead to discoveries, but I don't know, maybe there's a more efficient process to get to useful discoveries.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I mean, so there's problems, and a lot of it sounds like a lot of human error of sorts.
I think a lot of it is that the process is not very transparent, and that there's not a lot of accountability or transparency in it. Like if the reviewers were at least named, that would probably help.
Yeah. Now,
like if you could see who reviewed a paper,
right,
that would probably help. And if you could see the comments in the review process, that would probably also help. Now, PLOS One, what we're talking about, I believe that is not peer reviewed. And so people can just publish. And what ends up happening with PLOS One is that because it's not peer reviewed, people end up publishing controversial findings in it.
Right.
Now, some scientists just don't even believe a word they read in PLOS One. But some scientists are like, no, this is very important because a lot of these things would never get past peer review.
They wouldn't get past the gatekeepers.
And not because it's bad science necessarily.
Right.
Right. So that's an interesting little wild card on the field there. I don't think a lot of people realize that about PLOS One. And I'm not completely sure, but I think that's the case.
Okay. Yeah. So,
And
well,
PLOS, by the way, stands for Public Library of Science.
okay. So it's in the name.
Yeah.
What it's for and does. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, I think I can kind of understand maybe what the thinking was under why they would not reveal the name of the reviewers at first, because you wouldn't want to, like, what if the reviewers could get paid off or something like this,
Right.
Some kind of coercion that could happen there. But I think, like, after the fact, just say who the reviewers are.
Right. Exactly.
Like
maybe it's anonymous at first, but then when the paper gets published, the reviewer's name gets revealed.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of people whenever somebody brings up the points that you've brought up, whenever somebody complains about the peer review process, usually the first response of somebody, and this isn't just scientists either, or, other scientists either, but usually the response is something to the effect of, well, unless you're going to give me a solution of how to fix it, just shut your mouth. Like don't talk about it, which I think that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, I understand that kind of argument sits okay with me when you're dealing with just some asshat on Facebook that, is trying to tell you that, I don't know, the Earth's flat or some bullshit or hollow. And they're just like, yeah, but it's all peer reviewed. It's controlled by the elites, all the science and everything. And it's just like,
I
stop.
mean, there's a grain of truth in that, right? It is sort of a guild system, a
Sure.
gatekeeper mentality. And the journals themselves are gatekeepers as well, because you have, like, they've tried to make it so that any research that gets government funding, it has to be, like, made freely available online.
Okay.
But what happens is the journals end up charging the labs a fee to do that, like an access fee.
Right.
And so it's not always, like, perfect. It's not always like a regular Joe who isn't affiliated with a college can't always go and just read any scientific paper they want. And it kind of, I feel like it kind of should be that way, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to pay taxes for that research, you should at least be able to see the findings if you want to, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the journals themselves are gatekeepers. They charge people access fees, and they're ridiculous. Like, they're really high to read. Like, if you try to go to, like, a website of a scientific journal that's not open access, it'll say, like, okay, $60 to read this article, log in. They'll give you, like, the abstract. So yeah, anyway, that can be a problem. The journals themselves are gatekeepers, and the reviewers are gatekeepers. So there's gatekeepers all over the place. Now it just feels like, I think a lot of people see this system and they're like, this is archaic in the age of the internet.
Right.
When you could post a blog post, this is archaic to rely on all these gatekeepers and to have such a heavily guarded system. Why not just make everything more transparent? And I think actually our scientist friend Kevin McKernan has been kind of working on this, like trying to link publishing genomic data about strains of cannabis and about other organisms, animals and stuff that are having their genomes sequenced, and also just like big collections of data. He has been trying to link that to some kind of blockchain-based publication system, which is uncensorable and is free, open access to all.
Sure, and somewhat immutable. Yeah.
Right, and the only fees you would have to pay would be to, enter that data into the blockchain or hash it into the blockchain.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that makes all kinds of sense. I know we've talked to him quite a few times. He's just doing great things. So that's one solution. The transparency definitely sounds like a real solution, and that all this is really archaic. I mean, it's true. I've seen blog posts that are better science than I know some papers are. I mean.
Well, I guess you could always say, like, well, how do you believe a blog post? But how do you believe an academic paper, right? There's been reports that say that half of what gets published in academic journals, even with the peer review system, is bullshit. The findings are not reproducible. If you try to reproduce those findings in a different laboratory, do the exact same experiments, follow all their methods the same way, you can't get the same results.
It's the observation principle.
No, it's just that it was bullshit, or they had some factor affecting their results that they didn't account for, or whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, it makes sense. Like, one thing you learn in grad school as a PhD student is to be so super skeptical of any finding that you read, any scientific finding. Like, you have to apply the most extreme bullshit filter you possibly can.
Well, that's good science, in my opinion.
It is, but it's hard. I mean, because
Right.
a lot of people are just sort of trusting by nature, and like skeptical people tend to become scientists as well. But it's hard to be so skeptical all the time and to maintain that front of like no bullshit gets through.
Yeah.
You can be fooled easily. So anyway,
so that's pretty much the gist.
I think that's pretty much the gist.
I think it's a great breakdown of
Yeah.
what the system is, the problems, potential solutions, which are being worked on right now, which is great. And yeah, I mean, not that I want to turn things over to the computers. I could certainly see maybe where if we get more into the realm of where we're like really creating like more in the realm of kind of talking twice here, but where we're creating virtual realms where maybe some of this stuff could be, a little more statistically tested or something. I mean, maybe a lot of these papers could go through an algorithmic test. I mean, of course, those can be, you hand it over to a computer that could be falsified too, programmed incorrectly or something like this. But yeah, I think there's interesting things that could go down. So, okay.
And please peer review my assessment of the peer review process.
Yeah.
Like if you
know.
have other problems that you see with it, let us know. I might not have thought of everything.
Yeah, or solutions. I'm happy to bring those up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right, let's why don't we switch it up and let's go right to the albums, and I think we could end off with that because I think this is a fascinating little discussion, a little science, a little tech. That's good. And so, album of the week. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I don't have an album of the week, so you go first.
All right, well,
first and last.
All right. So, okay, my album for this week, and I'm going to get an album out of you. But
okay.
There is a band that, oh man, I am such a huge fan of this group, and they only ever, maybe they finally came out with a fourth album, but they had three. The first one came out, first one came out I think in '89, and that was Last of the Runaways, and I didn't even tell you the band name yet. The second one came out in 1992, and that was Time to Burn. The band name is Giant, just Giant. That's it, which makes it very difficult to like find them in Google and everything. But Dan Hoff is the head of this band. He's kind of the brains behind it, which Dan Hoff, now this is melodic, this is hard rock melodic stuff, which a lot of people have really appreciated that I've listed off in the past. They came out, like I said, with a sequel album to this, nowhere near as good. Last of the Runaways and Time to Burn are both great albums. In fact, their biggest hit came off of the previous album, which was Last of the Runaways, which was the song I'll See You in My Dreams, which is a ballad and just very, very sad song. In fact, I got a little bit of a personal history with it, but I'm not going to tell you that right now. No, same with Time to Burn, but I mean, like these albums are just these at least these two albums are so good. But Time to Burn, again, Dan Hoff. Now, Dan Hoff, he started off in kind of the metal world with Giant and all this stuff. He's one of the top writers in country music right now, which a lot of people don't know. In fact, one of my favorite country songs he wrote, which is Honky Tonk Badonkadonk by Trace Adkins. And I love that damn song. So anyway, yeah, so Time to Burn, it's pretty much track for track. Like it opens right up with Thunder and Lightning. And that's a very fun, like kind of a little bit of a fist pumping song. And then it goes into Chained. Oh man, very sexy, but like not sexy as in like it has a sexy groove or rhythm. Sexy in sort of what it's putting out there as far as like the words go. And then kind of the Dan Hoff just has this, he can really like his voice can reach some serious, like almost Bon Jovi style highs. That he can deliver, and it really comes out on that. Lay It On the Line is fantastic. There's a song, a very sad song on this, kind of like just like off of Last of the Runaways, which with I'll See You in My Dreams, but there's a sad song on there called Lost in Paradise. I mean, just breaks your heart when you listen to it, but it's so good. And like somehow each of these songs are really epic. In fact, probably the average length of a song on this album, which is amazing for a hard rock album. Usually it doesn't work out that way with like, if it's like a Judas Priest, like a, really heavy metal album, you'll get songs that are 7-8 minutes long or something like this. But I bet the average song length on this album is probably like 6 minutes. A lot of these are really long songs, and they take advantage, and they take it to some really epic heights, like where you get like these, not even guitar solos, just where like Dan Hoff will just keep up in the scale, on what's going on in the album. So, it's so good.
The ante.
Yeah. So, I mean, and there's a couple of what you could consider, maybe throwaway songs, but I think all of them are good. Two of my favorites, and I want to mention these because they're closer to the end of the album, and some people never get to the end of the album, and that's such a pity. One of my favorite ways to listen to albums is when I'm working out. Like, usually my workout is about the length of your average album. So I can listen to an entire album in one day, while I'm working out. And then I can find like a lot of these songs that people usually don't even get that far. Like, for example, Metallica. They had their album come out, Saint Anger. I love this album. I know a lot of people don't like it. I think it's fucking great. And there's a song towards the end which did eventually get some play because I think they named their movie after it. But there was a song, I was thinking of Some Kind of Monster. No, there's a song, I think it's track 9. It's called Shoot Me Again. And it's a great fucking song. Like, it is so, so good, but it never got radio play. And most people didn't get that far deep into the album, but it's a classic, like really groovy Metallica song. That I just enjoy the hell out of. So it's really sad when people can't get all the way into an album. So for Time to Burn by Giant, there's 2 songs towards the end. It's the 9th and 10th track, and it's Save Me Tonight is the 9th track, and then Without You is the 10th track. Or no, I'm sorry. The first one's is track 8, which is I'll Be There When It's Over. This song's great. Such a great, like, really kind of nice love song, heroic bit of business to it. And then Save Me Tonight is great. I mean, Without You is a good song too, but anyway, there's so many great tracks on this album. It's kind of hard to find any of Giant's albums because it's not a popular band at all. But I mean, this is great fucking hard rock. Just Dan Hoff Dan Huff, I'm sorry, is so good. I think I was thinking of somebody instead of Dan Hoff. Yeah. Anyway, but Dan Huff is just, pure talent. And Giant 3's not bad either, but it's nothing compared to Last of the Runaways and Time to Burn from 92. Just incredible. So yeah, in fact, yes, Last of the Runaways did come out in 89. I just took a quick peek. But anyway, that's your album of the week. Now, come on, Stephanie, give me something. Give me an album. Give me a Coheed and Cambria. Give me an AFI. give me something.
I was thinking about Coheed and Cambria or AFI because I just caught up on them like from 10 years ago when I stopped listening to them. But I'm actually going to go with something completely different. There is a DJ named WoodysProduce.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And I think his real name is Greg something, but he goes by WoodysProduce. And he's done a lot of different remixes, but my favorite one is that he remixed a bunch of Notorious B.I.G's songs. Oh. And they were all from, I think, one album. I think it was like Life After Death.
Okay.
Like one of the most recent ones that he did before he passed away.
Sure.
And he didn't do the whole album. It was just like, I don't know, 5 or 6 songs. But they're so good. Like, he remixed a bunch of songs, and he just made them sound so chill and like so different, but so good.
Okay, and so this can be found on SoundCloud?
Yeah, SoundCloud and YouTube.
All right, I'll put a link in the show notes for this album. And I know what you're talking about. It's great.
You've heard it, haven't you?
Yeah, it's solid. It's really good.
He did a remix of Going Back to Cali, and it's so good. It just made like. It seems like it's almost impossible to mess with Biggie's songs and make them better.
Right.
But he did.
He pulled it off.
I don't know how he did it, but he somehow did. And they're just way chill. And the other thing is there's a couple of the songs that have these voiceovers that are like a little bit weird. Like he remixed Big Papa, and he has this guy doing a weird voiceover. Like, I guess it's supposed to replace Puff Daddy. At the time he was Puff Daddy.
Right.
Doing the
can't replace Diddy, but you can try.
Yeah, but he didn't do it that good. I mean, it kind of makes this joke about like I don't know, about feet or something. Like
Okay.
Like being in defeat. He's like, I'm not in defeat unless you are.
Nice.
So that's a little bit lame, but the rest of it is so good. What was that song? There was another song that he remixed that's just really good. I don't know. All of them are good, so check it out.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes for that, and you can check that out. So WoodysProduce, his
And
remix.
He's got some other remixes too that are really good, like
Okay.
of other songs.
Sure. So, but his remixes of one of Biggie's albums, phenomenal.
Yep.
So, and then the other one was Giant, Time to Burn from 1992. Giant is the band name. And yeah, so great stuff. There you go. Stuff everybody can work out to or fuck to or have a good time, whatever you want to do. So Stephanie, I think we'll wrap that up. This will be one of the shorter Q&As, which is totally fine with me. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Yeah, your expertise, I think, was invaluable and fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.
Yeah.
We'll do some more Q&As together.
Yeah,
too.
we've got some other stuff.
We have a couple of other topics in the queue.
Yes, that we do. That you and I need to, can speak on directly.
Cues in the queue.
Yeah. So anyway, that's it. New Sex and Science Hour will be out this week, and of course, an all new Sovereign Tech will be out, which I actually, a little hint, I already recorded, and I think I enjoyed it, so I think you got a good episode coming. And that'll be it. Woo! I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovereign Tech. Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovereign Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.